So we're here to discuss the case of Julian Assange and the role of Ecuador. As many of you might know, the sort of new extradition proceedings begin again after some query as to whether they were set to begin. It looks like they will be beginning on Monday, the 7th of September, to determine whether Julian Assange is extradited to the US, where he faces 18 charges that could see him sentenced to 175 years in prison. Now, as you all know, Julian Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy from June 2012 till 11th of April 2019, when he was dramatically arrested by the British security services and police after the new president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, who's been in power since May 2017, sort of rescinded his diplomatic asylum status and allowed British police to come in. So we are really delighted to have with us today Fidel Narvaez, who was a consul in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for many years and was instrumental in Julian Assange ending up in the Ecuadorian embassy. And so we have a real insider's account of what took place. I'm also delighted to have a good friend, well, as with Fidel, Matt Kennard, investigative journalist, co-founder and head of investigations for Declassified, a relatively new website that began in 2019 that explores the UK security state. Is a kind of catch-all term to describe it. I'm sure Matt can explain more, perhaps, what they do. But it's been already in its short life, it's been incredible in terms of the type of journalism that's coming out, and really also speaks to perhaps some of the issues that we'll talk about later, the sort of the lack of critical inquiry around the UK government and the UK sort of establishment's behaviour, specifically around the case of perhaps Julian Assange, which Matt and his other colleagues have done some really sort of landmark articles already, which I highly recommend. And so the idea with today, actually before I explain how we're going to run this, some of you, hopefully many of you will know what Alborada is, but Alborada is essentially a portal that began in 2009 that tries to provide a sort of platform for perspectives on Latin America in English that challenge perhaps mainstream media, mainstream general narratives on the region. So we've done a number of events, I mean hundreds probably of events, and since the end of April we've moved online with this series of online events, and this is now our 7th event. I'm sure someone can share a link. I think Nick, co-editor, has tuned in for an hour, I think. He can maybe share a link to the 6 other events that we've done, which we've recorded and people can watch back. And we've had, actually, the last one we did was with Matt. So Matt is now appearing in the 6th and 7th. So we'll give him a rest for the 8th. But no doubt we'll bring him back soon. So I'd urge you to have a look at that. I'd also say that we have a PDF that we released in around March to sort of celebrate the 10th anniversary. That's free, that you can write to us to get a copy of. It's on our homepage. And we're also doing we're an independent media outlet, and we are poor as many other independent media outlets, and we have a kind of fundraiser to get to £500 a month in regular donations. Some of you here are already donating, and we thank you very much for that. But if you're not, and you'd like to make a one-off or regular contribution to our work, then you're more than happy. I'm sure Nick will also share the support link. So the way we're going to run this is that Matt and myself are going to talk to Fidel for about 40 minutes or so. And then we're going to open it up to you, to the audience, and we are allowing people to come on camera if they so wish to ask a question. But if you could either send your questions through the course of the conversation with Matt and Fidel to either myself or to everyone on the chat, and then I'll be kind of choosing questions. Just to say, though, if you are wanting to say to be on camera, is to as with all questions, to keep them relatively short. And 2, we are recording this event to then share it. So if you don't want to be, on camera, then I guess we can ask the question for you. So what else? I think that's it really. well, apart from, I mean, I've said that Matt works for Declassified. He's a Columbia journalism graduate. He worked for the FT for a number of years. He's got an excellent book called The Racket, which I strongly urge that you read, with a significant amount of content around Latin America, his coverage around Latin America, Bolivia. Fidel is, as I said, was the consul in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He's a long-standing human rights activist. He continues to work on human rights and migrant rights. He is currently, I believe, writing a book of about his experience in the embassy with Julian that will see the light of day in 2021. So you're perhaps going to get a sneak preview of some of the best bits of the book. We'll keep you informed about when that book comes out as well. So I've spoken enough. I will speak a little bit more just to ask the first question of Fidel. And I think the idea with Matt is that we alternate roughly, and we try and keep it as dynamic as possible. And then you guys can have an opportunity to come in. So Fidel, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'd just like to begin by asking if you could explain how you ended up as the consul of Ecuador under Rafael Correa in London, and yeah, if you tell me a little bit about your history and how, because you're not someone that went through the diplomatic services of Ecuador, and you know, you weren't on that conveyor belt, so to speak. So tell us a little bit about how you became the consul at this historic time in Ecuador.
Oh, thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Matt, and hello to everybody. I hope you can hear me well. It's a pleasure to talk to you tonight. I know Alborada, Pablo, his family quite well, and I'm a huge admirer of their commitment to the just causes. And this cause of Julian Assange is one that should concern everybody. Going to your question. Yes, I'm not a career diplomat. My background is also in international relations. I have my degree in international commerce and at the international relations faculty, I studied in Czech Republic in Prague. But my experience background is in human rights. In Ecuador, I was a human rights activist with some of the more important human rights organizations there. And because my family is binational, my wife is British, my children are British Ecuadorians, or Ecuadorian British, however you like to see it. We emigrated to the UK. I emigrated to the UK with my family. That this is the second country. Not to work with the embassy or the diplomatic service. I emigrated for family reasons. But since I came here, the citizen revolution started in Ecuador. Huge political change, finally, in my country. And I wanted to support that process from wherever I was. So I immediately started doing work with my community here, with the Ecuadorian migrants, with the Latin American migrants. I joined them and we started supporting the mostly the immigrational approach of a new constitution, which is one of the more progressive in the world in general. So with the new Ecuadorian government, for the first time, there was the possibility for the migrants abroad to have certain rights, to vote, to be elected for parliament. We have at the Ecuadorian parliament a special quote only for a special number of parliamentarians seats for the Ecuadorians abroad. And the government offered the opportunity to local community leaders to join the diplomatic service, in concrete, to join the consulates, which deal with the communities, with the immigrants, if they have the profile and the capacity to do that. So I was very lucky to be offered that opportunity by President Correa himself in 2009, and I joined the diplomatic service in 2010 as consul, as the Ecuadorian consul. So yeah, that's how I became consul.
Matt, over to you.
No, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Firstly, yeah, I'd just like to add to what Fidel said about Alborada. Pablo is quite humble, but I think what they have done in the media scape is quite incredible, really, over the last decade, I guess, because for many of us on the progressive end of the spectrum, Latin America is a kind of beacon of what is possible, and there is hardly any, or without Alborada, there maybe be none, really good critical coverage of the region. So the service they're doing for everyone in the Anglosphere is really important. And also, Fidel is what he did with Assange, but also with Snowden, rates him up there with the biggest contemporary heroes. So it's good to be on with him as well. But I guess what my question is, because obviously I'm a journalist and I see how the narratives of the powerful get out into society, and people like Assange are demonized and alienated from public opinion. And I just wondered, you obviously were on the inside and you were seeing how different the reality of all these events was to how they were presented in the media. And I mean, we all know that there's all sorts of propaganda going on the whole time. But if you could just comment a bit on how, especially the British media, because obviously this is, as you said, one of the most important cases in the modern era for free speech, for press freedom. Yet you see a media here that doesn't seem to care. And I just wondered if you could just comment on the media portrayal of Assange during your time in the embassy, but also subsequent to his them grabbing him from the embassy. What's happened subsequently?
Sure. Listen, half of what is said about Julian is totally lies, and the other half is very distortion. I know that for sure because I know well Julian. I've been in the embassy for 6 years with him at a daily basis, and he not only that he challenged the war criminals and exposed those crimes of those criminals, but I think Julian Assange also challenged the other more powerful entities that there are there, which are the biggest media. And I think he went into a confrontation with them, basically criticizing that they were being complicit in war crimes. They were being too permissive, passive, or even in complicity with the government narratives to go into war, and it became the enemy. Julian, with Wikileaks, suddenly became, well, he was named the Man of the Year in 2010. So he got a lot of envy from other journalistic entities. And especially in this country, in UK, where the coverage is the more important one for his case, because the ones who have the power to decide now his fate, his destiny, are the British, and they always were. The British were the ones who didn't let him enjoy his asylum in Ecuador. The British were the ones who surrounded that embassy for years. And those are the ones who are persecuting him judicially right now. So the coverage in this country is the more important one. And in my experience, is shameful, totally shameful. Yeah, because what they do is they have to kill the character, they have to kill the person. This is in order to make it easier for the judicial attack. If they take support from you, if they portray you as rapist, hacker, Russian asset, narcissist, all of which is complete defamation, and is only a matter to research a little bit and to base your opinions on facts, not on defamations. If they do that, they risk support from you. And the judges, they are human beings. They also will be subject to public pressure, public opinion, what the papers publish or what the politicians are talking. So the coverage about Julian, about his case, about his asylum, about his organization is shameful, especially in this country, but also in my country and in Sweden. Not so much in other countries. I have the opportunity to travel to different parts of the world, and it's very different. The interest is very different. How they read Julian's case than it is in UK and even in Ecuador now. Yeah.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, cool.
Because it is quite amazing for me that even the left in this country, which you would imagine would defend things like free speech and press freedom as they're vital to our cause, they've been pretty much silent. I mean, Corbyn was a bit different. John McDonnell's been quite outspoken recently. But in terms of the Labour movement, there's been hardly anything. And then I've noticed a big distinction with the leaders and the left movements in Latin America, because Lula's been quite outspoken. Correa, obviously, the Argentinians, Chavez, Evo, they've all spoken out in support of. In support of the Sons? Why do you think the Latin American left are so much more understands much more clearly than we do about the importance of this case for the future of press freedom and also just freedom generally? Well,
I would say that the major persecutor of Julian Assange is the United States, and it will. I think in Latin America we have more radical position in order to look at the United States as the hegemon in the world and in the region. So for the left, in Latin America, criticizing the United States is a matter of principles, and it's a matter of coherence. Not so much, I think, in Europe in general, and especially in the UK. Yeah. So I think this must be one of the few cases. I don't know if somebody can give another example where the colonizer and the colony swap roles in history.
Yeah.
Because there's no really sovereignty when we talk about the special US-UK relationship. We can see how the UK is dragged into illegal wars, even when the British population is opposing to it. So that gives you an idea of how much the establishment here, the British establishment, is how is the relationship of that establishment with the US.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think the issue of the media is fundamental, as Fidel says. I mean, the behavior, he's called it shameful, and I would completely agree. I think it's almost beyond comprehension, because I think what the British media and we'll talk about entities like the Guardian, which Matt's covered their relationship in terms of how they cover the security state and how they've covered the Assange case. I think the precedent that this essentially almost like a judicial snatch squad of Julian could mean for journalists, for their ability to practice their to practice journalism, is chilling. I mean, it means effectively that the U.S. government can arrest a foreign journalist in the UK and extradite him for charges which are basically to do with his publishing, with his journalism, but that categorizes them as espionage, and a journalist can face 175 years in prison. And there's been very, very little clamor from his colleagues in the UK media about this issue. Not only have they been silent, though, they have actively participated. They've been key actors in the smearing of Julian Assange, in the repetition of very convenient attack lines, which I would argue, the smearing of Julian Assange is right up there with the smearing of Jeremy Corbyn that we saw when he was Labour leader. And it kind of mirrors also the kind of smearing that Rafael Correa got by much of the British and US media when he was president, the smearing that Hugo Chavez received, and now Nicolas Maduro. So essentially, we see a pattern of smearing of individuals and movements which challenge the hegemony of ultimately the US and its satellite powers. And now I would include Britain, because Britain has increasingly shown that it's subjugated, certainly its foreign policy, but large parts of it, all of its policy, to the interests of the US. I mean, I was just reading this morning again about the case of Harry Dunn, a British, 19-year-old boy, teenager that got run over by a CIA agent in the UK, who then fled, absconded to the US, and the British government have basically done next to nothing to call for her to come over to face justice for killing a British citizen. Yet the British seem to, even though they might argue that it's a judicial process, impartial, and they seem to be doing everything in their power to ensure that Julian Assange is sent to the US to face these ludicrous and quite chilling charges that the Trump administration is wanting to inflict on him. So I think the media is fundamental, and I think maybe just before we end this conversation and just before we enter the Q&A, I'd like to ask Matt a little bit about his articles. But before I do, I actually want to take a little step back and go to say that Fidel, so you started in the embassy in 2010, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, and so Julian entered the embassy in June 2012, correct?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit. Maybe you don't want to reveal everything that's in your book, but tell us what you can about how did that happen? I mean, how did Julian Assange end up in the Ecuadorian embassy?
Well, we knew Julian for the year before he asked for asylum, because in 2011, Ecuador approached Wikileaks requesting the release of all diplomatic cables related to Ecuador. Let's remember that, to begin with, Wikileaks was working with certain media around the world in order to publish the diplomatic cables. And Ecuador basically thought that it will be good, it will be just right thing for the population to have access to everything. The local media in Ecuador were cherry picking the cables in order to attack the government. So we wanted everything come into light. So I was the one who approached Julian to request that. They were quite surprised. I don't think any other government have done that before with them or after. And the relationship started with them. I think that was a key action where probably Julian saw transparency on our behalf, and when he needed protection, he chose us to request for protection. So then he interviewed President Correa for one of his interviews. Julian in 2011 had, and 2012, sorry, had a program with TV interviews with different world leaders. He chose to interview President Correa, and soon after that, he requested protection because it was absolutely clear that the United States were going after him. So I knew him from before, and I had the privilege to help him requesting that asylum.
And can I just follow up as well? So he was granted diplomatic asylum in August 2012.
Yes.
Could you just spell out the criteria that the Correa government used to give him that asylum? On what basis was that asylum given, and what were the implications of that asylum? What should have happened to Julian Assange with that asylum status that he was given?
Well, basically, diplomatic or political or diplomatic asylum are the same institution. The only difference will be the diplomatic asylum take place in a diplomatic premises. But he has political asylum, diplomatic asylum, and does a human rights institution recognized in the United Nations, in the Convention for Refugees, and in Latin America, we have several regional treaties about political asylum. So when a country grants asylum to a political refugee, it's up to that country to take the decision. Basically, it doesn't even have to explain why we consider that person a political refugee, or that why we consider that persecution is political. However, when Julian came into our embassy, he handed over us a full dossier of the reasons and the evidence on how he felt persecuted by the United States. And we took 2 months in order to look into it very carefully. On Quito, it was a special team looking into it. We did approach United States, we did approach UK, we approached Sweden, we approached even Australia, all those countries involved in the case, in order to assess if what Julian and his lawyer were saying about the pseudo-secret grand jury investigation in the United States in order to get him into jail for publications about war crimes. We took 2 months assessing that, and we found out that there was completely justified the request for asylum. So in August, we granted that asylum. And what normally should happen is that the other states should respect that decision and allow the political asylee to enjoy that asylum, that is, to go to the place where he feels secure and safe, and that in that case it was Ecuador. We were requesting for them to allow him to go to Ecuador and enjoy his asylum. But one thing maybe is important to clarify here, because at the time, the narrative against Julian and that political move was, first, there is no persecution from the United States. There is no official request for extradition. And secondly, that he was avoiding the Swedish request for interrogation, because indeed there was an European arrest warrant. So what Ecuador said to everybody, especially to Sweden, is, with the political asylum, we do not want to interfere and we do not want Julian Assange to avoid any interrogation or any judicial activities in Sweden. So Julian could go to Sweden, but if Sweden will give us guarantees that he won't be extradited to the United States for political reasons. They never gave us that guarantee. From the very first day, we said the Swedish authorities could come into the embassy and they could question him there. They never wanted to do it. They took 5 years in order to agree to do that. Only after the United Nations, the working group on arbitrary detention, basically decided that Julian's situation was an arbitrary detention, and they dropped the case, obviously. Julian stayed in the embassy still after Sweden dropping the case, because the real reason why he was in the embassy was United States, as it was proven right immediately after he was expelled from the embassy.
Well, I mean, I can comment a bit more than add to what Fidel's saying about the irregularities on the case, because it's important for people to know that this is not a normal case. From the start, when you start scratching the surface, you understand that from the start, this case has been heavily irregular and has evinced all sorts of conflicts of interest that just have gone completely unnoticed. So, for example, as Fidel said, the Swedes were invited to come to London and interview in an embassy, and they refused. And there was an email, Stefania Marisi, the Italian journalist, got documents from the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, which was overseeing the case, which showed that CPS officials were saying to the Swedes, don't you dare get cold feet about this case, don't drop the investigation, i.e. we need you to keep this investigation going so we can keep him in the embassy. So, and what I've been looking at in my work is the more recent stuff around the case at Westminster Magistrates Court, and it's mind-blowing. I've done 6 stories so far. I've got another 2 coming for the start of the hearing, and it's mind-blowing because the chief magistrate, Lady Arbuthnot, whose husband is a former Conservative defense minister, is the founder of a consultancy with the former head of MI6, John Scarlett, called S&C Strategy. I mean, he is the embodiment. If you were going to look for a figure that represented the British establishment, he is it. Now, before Assange was pulled from the embassy, she, in February 2018, she made 2 quite important rulings on the Assange case. There was a request by Assange's lawyers to have the bail violation rescinded because the case had been dropped in Sweden. And if they had done that, and the argument being that obviously the case had been dropped, and actually it had been proven that the US case was his real concern, so the bail violation could have been let go. She made a ruling. She refused to do that, which meant he couldn't take up his political asylum. But also she railed against him in the ruling, which was quite unusual for a chief magistrate. She said things like she dismissed the findings of the UN group on arbitrary detention. She said he doesn't evince any health problems that are a real worry. And she said a number of things that were just really unusual. Then she stopped presiding over the case. When Assange came out, there was a judge called Snow, and then now it's Vanessa Vareza. But she never officially said, "I'm stepping aside." And what came out, I saw a story. The only official acknowledgement was in Private Eye about a year or 6 months ago. She or Westminster Magistrates Court released a statement saying that she is no longer, she's stepping aside on the case, i.e. she's not ruling. But the important point is, in her position as the chief magistrate, she has a mentoring role and an overseeing role over all of her junior judges, including Vanessa Bereza. And she was likely involved in choosing Vanessa Bereza because all her junior judges are effectively under her control. And she wouldn't have had that license if she had officially recused herself, which is a different thing, which means that you say there is a conflict of interest, I can't rule on this case, and then she has nothing to do with it. And then the defense have the right to revisit her previous rulings. So she hasn't done that. And we've compiled thousands of words of evidence about the conflicts of interest at the heart. And it goes, and another recent story I did was actually about Vanessa Bereza herself, because my hunch is she was chosen because there is actually nothing on her in the public interest. It's quite unusual for a judge to have absolutely nothing on them in public, including there's no photo of her. So I applied to the Ministry of Justice through the Freedom of Information Act to get just a basic request to say, can I get a list of cases that she's ruled on? And they refused it point blank, and they applied an exemption related to the Data Protection Act, and also another exemption. And so I thought, well, that's a bit funny. So I did the same request, exactly the same, for another judge who was appointed on the same day as her in 2011 to the same circuit. And they came back and they said, well, they did decline the request, but they didn't say it was for any reason. No absolute exemption was applied. They merely said, we might be able to look at your request, but you need to refine it because it falls outside the limit for how much we can spend on looking for it, which is about 500 quid. So I tried to refine it, and I'm still in the process of refining it. The point is there was two completely different answers. And that just gives you a hint of what is going on here, because they are guarding the secrecy around this case massively. And then the other thing I did for that story, which was quite interesting, was I used Westlaw, which is this paid-for legal database. I was like, well, if they're not going to give me this information, I should have a look myself and see what's out there. And I went through every single reference there is to Bereza, and there was about 36, I think, of all the cases, extradition cases she's ruled on. I found 35 of them she'd ruled extradition. So she has a 96% extradition rate. So, I mean, that's from open source. We don't know what the real figure is because, as I say, the Ministry of Justice won't reveal it. But it's on and on. Another amazing revelation, which should really knock the case on the head, really, is that we found out that Lady Arbuthnot received financial benefits personally, i.e. she personally received financial benefits from partner organisations of the Foreign Office, the UK Foreign Office. Now, in 2018, the UK Foreign Office called Assange a miserable little worm, and as we know, they've been behind a lot of the obstacles to him actually taking up the asylum. So it's just riven with conflict of interest and irregularities, and that is why I'm quite pessimistic about what the result may be. As Fidel says, I think if there was a critical mass of media really taking up the issue, I think it could change the game, because it would change public perception. It would put pressure. I think the one hope we have is there is increasing bravery from NGOs and press freedom organizations. I think a lot of them have been really slow out the blocks, but you are seeing Amnesty, Reporters Without Borders, organizations in the US really coming out now. And I think that is adding quite a lot of pressure to the legal system, which is good. And I think we all need to, I mean, there's a propensity, and I do it too, to be angry at the people that previously didn't do what they should. But I think we need to get rid of that and just welcome anyone who comes on board, because really the more people that come on board, especially from the mainstream, the more likely it is that Assange will walk free. And it is, and I've said this many times, and I'm sure you guys have as well, but there is the most important press freedom case maybe in history. This is the information age journalism case. There's obviously been very important press freedom cases, but he is the emblem of this new way of doing journalism. If they get him, it puts a massive block on anyone being able to really reveal information which damages national security states. And I don't mean damage in a sort of wanton way. I mean damage their ability to tell lies and to exert their domination. And that is what they care about. And they don't care about the rest of the media, because the corporate media don't do their job. And as Fidel said, a large part of the reason Assange is so hated is because he showed up the media class. And it's so true, because I came up in the corporate media, in the Financial Times and other places. And I remember I was at the Financial Times actually in Washington, DC, in 2010, when the Cablegate was happening. And I was the same as I am now politically. And I was very excited. And I remember talking to people in the office, and they were really anti-Assange. They really hated what he was doing, because journalism to them isn't about actually changing the world. It's about observing the world. In a sense, it's like that Karl Marx phrase, philosophers before have wanted to analyze the world, whereas the point is to change it. I think Assange kind of applied that to journalism, and his journalism was really changing the world. And I think when history is written, it will be seen as one of the most important moments in terms of freedom of information and understanding the world, maybe ever. So they want to get Assange, because if they get him, it changes the game, and it will send chills down any journalist that wants to do their job properly. I mean, we do at Declassified, we cover the national security state here. I mean, if we see a story now that involves a whistleblower who's within the national security state, and Assange gets sent, we will have to worry about what happens if we just do our jobs as journalists, because the US has this extrajudicial reach where it can go wherever it wants. And as Fidel says, I don't think we have an independent judiciary. We definitely don't have an independent country. So it's very worrying. I think we'll see what happens. I don't know what will happen in September. I'm pessimistic, but I'm also hopeful, because you have to be.
Thanks, Matt. That's so interesting. And I want to open it up to the audience, but before I do, a couple of things. One is to just plug the last Alborada Online we did with Matt, Camila, and John McAvoy, which was about how the mainstream covers Latin America, and then we were all highly critical of that. So if you'd like to see that program, you can access it by one of the links I think Nick has sent. Now, before I do open it up, I want to stay on the issue of the media, and Matt's work has been incredible, and his colleagues at Declassified. But I want to talk about the Guardian, the newspaper, the sort of flagship left-wing, some people call it, left of centre liberal newspaper in Britain. I mean, with Snowden, it published many of these revelations. It won a Pulitzer along with Glenn Greenwald for that work. Then it partnered up with WikiLeaks at the beginning, but then there was a big acrimonious split, it seems, and then it became very hostile towards Assange. And now I think its new editorials have come out saying that his possible extradition is a threat to journalism. So I'd like to ask Matt, because Matt has written about the Guardian, like the wider context of the Guardian security state reporting. And I also want to ask Fidel, because Fidel has a case against the Guardian that he's been pursuing for an article that they wrote where they included, where they spoke about his actions or alleged actions. So I want to get both of you to talk about those issues. So first, perhaps Matt, to provide some context.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that the Guardian has always sort of been the liberal end of the British establishment. It's gone very wrong there in the last sort of 5-6 years, but they always performed a function that was a part of the British state. It's a very Oxbridge private school heavy institution, and it reflects those sort of interests. But the work we've done was more about what happened to it after Snowden, because as I said, they did have a real crew of good journalists who covered firstly the WikiLeaks stuff, then the Snowden stuff, and they really did step on some toes in terms of the national security state in the US and the UK. And this was a massive problem for the security services, because having a paper of that kind of influence that has the resources to cover leaks like WikiLeaks and Snowden meant that these stories became global stories and really exposed them. So we did some work. We found basically documents from the D-Notice Committee, which is the sort of censorship body that gives advice to UK journalists who are covering national security issues. and they started posting the minutes from their meetings at the MOD online, and we sort of cross-referenced what those meetings were saying during the Snowden leaks to what we knew was happening from open source stuff, and we basically just saw that an operation was done on the Guardian. Effectively, they threatened massively the Guardian after Snowden, and as we know, went into the Guardian offices and smashed up laptops, which was a real threat, effectively. And then which was not known before, but we found out that they'd then asked for the deputy editor of the Guardian to sit on the denotice committee, which any self-respecting journalist, in my opinion, wouldn't do. But anyway, the Guardian effectively said, we need to give something back to the security services. We pissed them off so much. And this was all happening. And then this new editor, Catherine Viner, came in 2014. And I think they really sniffed an opportunity. Within a year of her being put in position, the MI5 offered their first ever interview with a newspaper of a sitting head of chief in over 100 years. Then the following year, there was an exclusive with a similarly amazing exclusive with the head of MI6. So they sort of did this sort of sweetness and courting of the Guardian, effectively. And then you had, and Assange is obviously the bête noire of the security services. So you saw their coverage, which was never good on Assange, to be fair, but got ridiculous. And in 2018, as Fidel will know, because some of the articles related personally to him, they had a stream of stories for over about 6 to 9 months, where there was just endless stories about constantly linking Assange with Russia. And this was kind of the prelude to them grabbing him from the embassy. And it's very suspicious. Maybe Fidel can cast some light on who the leakers are, because I've never quite been sure. I was wondering about this the other day, actually, whether it was UC Global actually sending the Ecuadorian intelligence agencies, which were the source of the Operation Hotel documents. But anyway, there was the Guardian became effectively the laundering device for various intelligence agencies and various interests, and to destroy Assange. And they did it willingly. They didn't put up any fight. And in fact, going back to this, I'll finish with this, because it's probably better to hear from Fidel about that stream of stories, because he knows it much more intimately than me. But it's very interesting just to relate to the stories I've been doing with Mark for the Classified that I mentioned earlier. None of this stuff has been done in The Guardian. None. Not one story investigating the conflicts of interest. And this is of profound importance, because if some institution with the power and the reach of The Guardian did what we were doing, he would probably be free right now. And I don't think that's hyperbole. I think if there was real established publications and established journalists doing the work we were doing, I think the pressure would have been enough by now to get him out. And they're not doing it. They're kind of stopped doing the hit pieces now. Now they just don't really cover it or do small news stories. But the point is, The Guardian are responsible. They used Assange. He incurred all the risk. They used him, and now they're doing nothing to get him out. And it's nothing short. Well, it is disgraceful and shameful. And I think what needs to happen is that firstly, people are aware of what's happening. But I think effectively that the Guardian should be shunned for its role in the Assange case, but also obviously it feeds into Corbyn, but we won't go into that now. But The Guardian has effectively gone from being the biggest tormentor or being used as the laundering device of security services to demonize Assange and link it with Russia, to now just doing nothing to help him. Now he's stuck in Belmarsh. So that's kind of the lay of the land.
Fidel, would you like to, are you able to tell us something about your own kind of experience with The Guardian and some of the issues that Matt spoke about this kind of systematic, 6 to 9 months of smear pieces?
For me, it's very disappointing to see how the newspaper, which is supposed to be the voice of the left in this country, inserting issues that I know quite well, and this about Julian, the asylum, his persecution, the embassy insights, I know very well. They get so wrong. And I'm not able to explain why. If that's I doubt that's pure incompetence. I don't think they can be so incompetent. I am not able to explain why, but I know for sure that is appalling, totally appalling, the reporting. In the case of Julian, they have relied on totally unreliable sources, which come from the private security company that was hired by Ecuador to protect the embassy, that now we have the evidence that they were spying on Julian, spying on us, the diplomats. Basically, they sold themselves to a third party. And some of the officials of the Ecuadorian security services. In any country, security services are they have their own law. Basically, they are lawless. They are very difficult to control, and for Ecuador it was also the case. So the Guardian has accused Julian of hacking into the embassy communications. They have accused him of getting into fights with diplomats. But those are minor things. Yeah, those are very minor things. They have published visitors that never happened. The most notably one, the one about Paul Manafort, the ex-director of campaign for Trump. The Guardian basically published that the guy was there, I think even 2 times. Yeah, something that is incredible, because there's no other media that could corroborate that, because it never happened. And I know for sure that it's impossible for it to happen. They have not retracted that story, which is very damaging. It's absolutely damaging. Based on that story, the United States request the government of Ecuador, the new government, they requested information from the embassy, visitor logs, documents from the embassy, communications, and they interview something like 15 diplomats and admin personnel who work at that embassy. All that based only in Guardian's publication. And they also publish about the supposed Russian plot to smuggle Julian out of the embassy, where they portray me as some kind of operator with Russian diplomats. All no sense, based on nothing. I challenged that publication, and it took a year, the whole year, to go through the internal complaints procedures in the paper. It ended up in the last stage of the complaints procedure, which is a review panel, supposed to be independent panel, and they ruled basically that they could not prove what they published. Basically, it was a lie. So it's really disappointing, and I agree with Matt. If the major newspapers, if the major media in this country will do their job properly, without hidden agendas, maybe Julian's fate will be different.
Can I just add something to that? Because we do have an example of one newspaper, which isn't particularly left-wing, but I guess is on the liberal end of the spectrum, El País in Spain. They've been doing a string of very important stories revealing the truth about what UC Global, the security company that Fidel referenced, was doing in the embassy, and their relationship with the CIA and other US interests. And that's really changed the debate. And there's a case ongoing in Spain, actually, that they're covering. That doesn't exist here. And as Fidel said initially, this is the most important jurisdiction for the survival of Julian Assange and the survival of press freedom after this case. Britain is the place that it will all happen. If he goes to the US, it's game over. So the pressure for journalists to cover this stuff and to investigate, that's important, not just cover it, investigate what's going on, is huge, but it hasn't had much of an impact as of yet.
Okay, so we have about half an hour, and I think we've gone a little over what we said we'd go in terms of the conversation. We've had a number of questions, so I'm going to put two out there to begin with, and then we can see if any more come in, or we can all carry on the conversation. So I have a question for from Alison Mason, who says, at what stage will it be possible for Julian to sue the newspapers and outlets which have defamed him? George Galloway, the ex-British politician and now TV presenter, got £2.4 million from the Telegraph. Will Assange have to wait until he gets out? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of the panelists can speak to that, but there's another question here from Ian Munro. Do you think the current investigation into UC Global in Spain at the moment has the potential to benefit Julian Assange's case? I'll put that out to both of you. I mean, Matt, perhaps without speaking directly about the first one, because it's very difficult to really speculate. Could you tell us anything about the situation with libel law in the UK? I know it's, from what I understand, it's extremely unfair, essentially, to the person being libeled. Although, yeah, George Galloway has successfully. I don't know. Sorry, I'm just springing that on you. But yeah, I'll put those two questions to both of you.
Do you want to go first, Fidel, or should I? I don't mind.
I go for the second question, which is the one I know better. I very much hope that the case in Spain against UC Global, which, in my opinion, it has only one outcome. For what I've seen, and I have already testified in that case. The only possible outcome is that they are guilty of spying on Julian and of the rest of us. And as a result of that, they have spied on his legal meetings. They have spied on his legal strategy. They have spied on his lawyers. And if they have spied for the United States, basically that should destroy the case, because it means that Julian has not have any chance of fair trial. Not only because his persecutors have already access to his legal strategy, but basically because those persecutors use illegal methods to persecute him. And there are, in United States, there are already precedents on this. Now, the major precedent is Daniel Ellsberg, famous Pentagon Papers, where he was also called the most dangerous man in America, and he was going to be sent to jail for life, basically, many, many, many years. And it was demonstrated that the CIA and the FBI were basically spying on him and on his doctors. So that basically destroyed that persecution. So, but that said, that's an outcome that's coming from a Spanish jurisdiction. That's a Spanish judge saying this company is guilty of spying on Mr. Assange and his lawyers. and they will go to jail in Spain. That's not binding, in my opinion, for the British judges to be obliged to use it in the decision. It should be morally binding. I mean, if a judge says that, the Spanish judge says that, it's quite obvious that they need to look at it and they need to take in account. But given what we have seen, the judicial treatment that Julian is being subject, I don't know if that's for granted. But in any case, if that is not relevant for the Spanish, for the British judges, it should be in America if Julian is extradited to the United States. And I want to make one clarification, because I think at the beginning, Pablito said that now in September, the judges will decide if Julian is guilty of those charges, and he will be either sentenced to 170 years. That's not the case. The decision that's going to be taken here in September is basically if he's extradited or not.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just a quick one on the Spanish case. It seems amazing that if a Spanish justice system, finds that there was, all of this illegal monitoring or spying of a person, even though it's Ecuadorian, territory, because it's the Ecuadorian embassy, that this judgment should have no effect on the case, because as you say, it basically means that Julian has been unable to receive a fair trial. So one is the question is, when is that judgment likely to take place? And do you know if there's, so you're saying there is no, there's no kind of relationship between that case and perhaps what's taking place here in the UK?
I'm not for sure. This is a question for a lawyer to see how they are able to use that judgment in this case. But I think the Spanish case is going well and fast, but it's a huge case. It's a big case. They haven't even managed to look into the whole evidence, the investigators, because there's so many hours and hours and hours and hours of video footage, of documents, it's a lot of information that they need to go into it. And to be honest, I don't know when it's going to conclude.
If this case was a normal case, it should have been thrown out by now, really, because you have evidence now of a client discussing his case with his lawyers being spied on by the prosecutors. So it's not a fair trial. Fundamentally, not everything else aside, push everything else aside, that is illegal. That is not due process. And if that's found to happen in any normal case, it's thrown out, and it should be immediately. The fact it hasn't been is due to what we've been talking about. This isn't a regular case. And as Fidel mentioned, Ellsberg, Nixon ordered a raid on his therapist's office and stole his records to try and get information about his mental state to smear him in the press. And that actually had the effect of that case being thrown out, even though that was a really high profile case, which the government really wanted to prosecute him. That had that effect. Now, in this case, it should have the same effect, but it hasn't. And yeah, well, you can draw your own conclusions from that. I mean, the UC Global revelations are Titanic and should be brought in somehow. I think I recall that there was even resistance from the British legal system initially to allow the Spanish case to be heard at all by the court, and then they changed tact, but they had to appeal it, and it was very irregular. I remember reading that they said even trying to get the evidence heard here was irregular. And obviously, just for a bit more background for people, the UC Global revelations said that there was a server in the States that the company was uploading this data to, which was accessed by the CIA. So, yeah, I mean, it's outrageous, and it shouldn't. And regardless of the technicalities of it, it should be thrown out. And I'm sure that, as Fidel said, if you ask a lawyer, there would be technicalities that it does violate. Just to go back to the question,
there are some witnesses from that case that are going to testify in London.
Okay, yeah,
So,
there we go. To go back to the case of, what was the other question about libel? I think Julian Assange could spend the rest of his life taking libel cases if he went. I don't know what it would really do now. I mean, he's not in any position really. He's got to focus on this case. If he's free, I'm sure that's not going to be the first thing on his mind. I mean, as we've talked about tonight, and as Pablo mentioned at the start, anyone who takes the route of stepping on powerful interests will be smeared in the press. We've seen it. As you said, every single liberation leader in Latin America it's happened to. Every single journalist or publisher that does what Julian Assange does, it happens with. It's much more clear cut in many parts of the world because you get thrown in prison by the state immediately. You get tortured in the Middle East or in the Gulf. You know, it's very clear cut here. The same sort of authoritarian impulses exist, but they're much more deeply buried because they have to be because of the norms we have in our society. But be under no illusion that those kind of authoritarian impulses exist and are having a major impact on this case. I mean, I've been doing quite a lot of reading about other national security whistleblowers in the UK, and there was one in the 90s called Richard Tomlinson, who was an MI6 whistleblower, and he was put in Belmarsh like Assange, and actually his memoir is called The Big Breach, and he has quite a long section about Belmarsh and about how he knew MI6 had got the judicial system to put him in Belmarsh to break him. And he was only there for 6 months. And he said that eventually they just gave up and he managed to, they told him to leave and he left. And then there was David Shaler as well, who was the Mi5 whistleblower in the early 2000s. He was put in Belmarsh as well. So Belmarsh is used as this kind of like brutal regime to try and break people that take on vested interest. There's no, one of the other stories we did about Assange, which I should mention briefly, was through the Freedom of Information Act. I requested from the Ministry of Justice a list of all the offences of people who were being held in Belmarsh. There was 697 inmates. Only 2 of them were in for bail violation, with one of them being Assange. Over 20% of people held in Belmarsh are for murder. A high percentage of the rest are for really awful sexual crimes. So the fact he's in there, he's never been accused, he's never been charged with a violent offence in his life. The fact he's held in this really brutal prison, which has a famous maximum security ward, is a function of the whole process we've been talking about. He's being punished by interests that we can't see, but we know are there because they have to be, because everything is so irregular. It just doesn't make sense. It's not a coincidence.
We have a comment here from Angela Reyna, who just calls it judicial corruption. She says she was a witness at the trial in February and she observed the sham trial and all the characters involved, and the case should be tossed. We've also had a number of comments of people lambasting the Guardian's Latin America coverage. We've got John Perry talking about its coverage of Nicaragua. Someone else talking about its Bolivia coverage. We have an Alborada online we did on Bolivia, and it mentions the journalist that we, Oli Vargas, who was part of the panel, who's been doing excellent work. So you can, I think that was number 4. So be sure to check that show out. Now we have a question here from Emmy Butlin. Hello, Emmy. Emmy features for those that have seen the documentary that I made recently. Emmy is from the Julian Assange Defense Committee. Apologies if I got the acronym, the name wrong there. And Emmy features in that documentary, and she's joined us. And her question is, she says, the overt and covert surveillance operation outside the Ecuadorian embassy was extensive. Would you like, and I guess this is for Fidel, would you like to share what that meant for the operation of the embassy and the effect that operation had on the life of Julian Assange inside the embassy? That's for Fidel.
Well, yeah, quite surreal, really, to be inside that place because from the very beginning we were surrounded by the British police cars, policemen on the street for years. And we knew basically that they were using long-range microphones from the police cars where they were parked outside the embassy. We also spotted some cameras in neighborhood balconies or windows. And we had to arrange also our own security cameras system inside the embassy, which with later on they were also spying on ourselves. Thanks UC Global. So it was difficult. It was difficult because our telephones were always intervened. There was impossible to make a normal phone call from inside the embassy from a mobile phone. Now we have learned with the Spanish case that also the Americans were spying on us from neighboring buildings with laser microphones. I didn't know that such a thing exists, but it is described in the Spanish case. So laser microphones. So it was difficult. Even us, the diplomats needed to use noise cancelling machines in order to hold our meetings. Julian, as is known now, he needed to have his more private conversations in the corridor, next to the bathroom, or even in the bathroom. Yeah. So it was a very difficult environment to work. Imagine how it was to live there. And Julian was there for 7 years.
Can you imagine if a journalist and publisher who was in the Ecuadorian embassy in Moscow was treated like this by the FSB and the Russian security services? It would be a major cause celeb for the whole of the Western media. Everyone would be talking about it. He would be a hero. I mean, it's outrageous this is happening in the heart of London. You have the world's most powerful intelligence agency spying on a journalist and publisher and diplomatic staff, violating all sorts of laws. And there's no repercussions. This is all public. In fact, not only is no repercussions, it's not even covered. Most people don't even know this. It's been covered in El País, but it's hardly been covered in the UK media. This is happening in the UK. No one cares. It's unbelievable.
Well, just to say that we will be releasing this video, and hopefully all of those that take part can share it, and we can get people viewing. Because just, I mean, even having made this film, having covered some of the protests, some of the case, you know, the different cases at the magistrate's court, and knowing a little bit about the case, you know, just hearing what we've heard this evening is truly shocking. And I think if you were to poll the average person in the street about what they know about the case, and if you were to put perhaps just some of the top 5 most shocking revelations that have been spoken about tonight, I think people would be horrified really to hear that this is how the British judicial system and the British state is treating a publisher. And I just want to, I mean, again, saying that I covered a couple of these protests outside the embassy, and I recall going back on the tube and even just once turning, as I was about to get on at Knightsbridge, I think the station near Harrods, I turned back and I see a guy sitting down with a long lens camera, just looking at me with his long lens camera and just clicking away. And I was just, you know, it was, you did feel, you know, I was one of only perhaps 2 journalists covering that particular protest. And you did feel that there was a heavy level of surveillance going on. And we must remember that Britain is a world leader in surveillance technology. I remember the Uribe government and many authoritarian right-wing governments, you know, get their equipment from the British companies, which is facilitated by the British government. They come here for fairs. And so Britain is a world leader in this kind of stuff. So it's really outrageous, and I think it speaks to the, you know, to the crisis in British democracy, that we can allow such unaccountable power to do this to people in Britain on behalf of foreign governments. Because as Matt said, if you swapped the US, you know, if you swapped the embassy in London for the embassy in Moscow, I mean, this would be headline news in every single newspaper. Yeah, I think it's truly remarkable and disturbing. So I think we don't have any more questions, and we have 10 minutes or so. I mean, Matt, is there anything you want to pick up on in terms of your work around Assange, and in terms of, as you say, you know, we've spoken about the British government's behaviour towards Julian Assange, and this is in the context of other sort of laws, the Official Secrets Act, the possible revisions by the Johnson government, the Snoopers Charter that exists, which allows, you know, the British security services to monitor pretty much all communication with kind of some qualification, but not much accountability. I mean, and at the same time, you have the British government last year, in 2019, was it, hosting this media conference, where co-hosting, where it was, you know, London was the centre for journalists around the world to celebrate the, you know, freedom of expression and the safety of journalists. And, you know, less than an hour away, the British government has put Julian Assange in solitary confinement in Belmarsh. So, I mean, how this disconnect is quite surreal between the kind of shameless hypocrisy that the British government can, on the one hand, be sort of lauding and pontificating about freedom of expression and how it protects journalists' rights, and on the other hand, just be kind of just shamelessly appears persecuting a journalist.
Yeah, it is, and it's not just journalism. It goes across the board with the British state. We are swimming in propaganda, and most of it, if we lived in a rational society or had a rational media, would be laughed out the room as soon as any politician said we support freedom and democracy. I mean, as you said, we are supporting most of the most repressive, awful dictatorships in the world, primarily in the Gulf, Middle East, East Asia, some of them as well. And in journalism, yeah, we got a journalist and publisher who's been in a maximum security prison for a year, never been charged with an offence before he was put in there. Then charged with these US charges, which if extradited would set new precedents, which would endanger any journalist doing proper journalism about the national security state. So it's a joke, really. And it goes back to a fear of the national security state of being exposed, because we have, amongst the democratic countries, we have one of the most secret states, much more than the US. We have security services that are outside of the Freedom of Information Act, which is unlike a lot of our Western allies. MI5 and MI6, there's no way of getting any information about them, GCHQ2. Special forces, you can find out nothing through the Freedom of Information Act. Many parts of the British state are completely shielded from any scrutiny. So someone like Assange, whose philosophy is all about freedom of information, poses a real threat. And for these people in the information age, what Assange did and what good journalists do is the big threat to them, because they need to control the information, and it's vital to narrative control. So what they want to do now, and the Assange case is part of this, is they're pushing back. And I don't know if everyone saw the Russia report from the Intelligence and Security Committee, but after 30 or so pages of that, they came up with recommendations which called for a new Official Secrets Act, which effectively would criminalize the handling. Well, there was a commission in 2011 which recommended an update to the Official Secrets Act, and one of the recommendations was to criminalize the handling of classified data. So in journalism up till now here and in the US, the leaker was criminalized, but the journalists themselves wasn't criminalized. If you received the information you wrote about it, that's fine, or released it. But what they want to do is they want to disrupt that process. They want to criminalize the journalists, so journalists are scared to do these stories. And Assange is the perfect emblem of that. But if the precedent with him is set, then it's over. But they'll probably do it anyway. even if he gets off. But this kind of ability to get the truth out of in democratic countries, because of the norms that exist, people won't really tolerate putting journalists in prison, is a real problem for them. So they're really trying to change the law to put fear into journalists. But another thing is that I'm talking about journalists as this sort of monolithic block. They're not. There's about 90% of journalists in the UK don't do their job properly, so don't pose any threat to power. They are actually they're accessories to power, and as Fidel mentioned, that's partly why Assange is so unpopular. He really did show up what journalism is about in the UK and the US, which is to be courtiers really to power rather than take them on. And I think that there's more space now with the technology that exists for journalists who want to do proper work to get their stuff out. So that does pose a problem. So in conclusion, we need to make sure Assange does go free, because if we don't, then it's sayonara for press freedom and sayonara for a type of journalism that sees its role as being adversarial with power, because that idea is under attack.
Well said, Matt. We've got 2 more questions. We've got 6 minutes, but I've got a question for Fidel as well. So let's try and do them all at the same time. We have another question from. Oh, we've got a good one from Marie saying, "We all know that this will not finish in September. Do you not think the US will interfere in the Ecuadorian elections? And on the contrary, if Correa's party, so the former president, is running on a ticket as vice president, wins the election, that will have an influence on the Assange case." So that feeds into a question that I wanted to ask Fidel, to tell us a little bit about, with Lenin Moreno, we could devote a whole, and we probably will do a whole Alborada event on what has happened in Ecuador with Lenin Moreno, because he came from the same party as he was Rafael Correa's candidate. Yet there was dramatic about turn in all types of policy, and with Assange being emblematic of this. So I'd like to, if you could tell us a little bit about what was offered to the Lenin Moreno government by the US to give up Assange, or why did Moreno give up Assange, in your opinion? And what about the Ecuadorian media? How big of an issue is this? What's happened to Julian Assange in Ecuador? Has it become less important, more important? Is the media very much like the British media, kind of sort of almost parroting the lines of the British security state, of the Ecuadorian case, the Ecuadorian security state? And I'm going to add the last one. Well, it's a small. Again, Alison has another question for Matt. I'm sure Bill Binney said war crimes. Sorry if I've said that wrong. Said war crimes were not allowed to be classified. Is this true? So first Fidel, then Matt, and then I think we'll wrap up.
Sure. Well, Moreno basically betrayed his country, his voters, democracy. He betrayed everything possible, and Julian was a victim of that. To be honest, I don't know if the name of Julian Assange was ever on a piece of paper in any of the conversations. We will never know that. But it was an important issue for the United States, always. I don't think they needed to offer much to Moreno. He has given them everything, basically. Everything. Even the right to do military operations again in Ecuador, at the Galapagos Islands, for example. Yeah. So basically, for Moreno was the combination of the local pressure from the elite groups, the factical powers that were always opposed to everything done by President Correa, and Julian Assange asylum was seen as one of the emblematic steps of the sovereign foreign policy of President Correa. our elites, they are always trying to please United States. So with a government that pledged to the new foreign policy, basically dictated by Washington, it was impossible to expect that Julian won't be handed over as he was. Yeah. So the media in Ecuador, unfortunately, are even worse than in the UK. And there are very, very few exceptions that they want to do the work properly, but the spectrum is dominated by the powerful animals, the powerful fishes. And they are basically shameful, totally shameful. So they were always opposed to the asylum, and they have played big part in the defamation of Julian Assange. In Ecuador, even the president, the vice president, his ministers, they have said that Julian Assange was spreading feces in the embassy walls, which is totally lie. There's nobody who could corroborate that, but they say it, and the media don't challenge them; they replicate those lies. Yeah. So the elections are in February 2021. There's no democracy now in Ecuador. The government, who is very, very, very unpopular, has still the support of the media, of the banks, of the more powerful actors in Ecuador. So they have the control of all institutions, including the electoral bodies. So it's not certain what's going to happen in February 2001. If they were fair elections, I think it's unavoidable that the citizen revolution will win again the elections. We have a brilliant candidate, a young guy he's only 35 years old, and he's been minister under Correa in several positions, and it's a brilliant guy. I'm looking for, and he's very much sympathetic to Julian's case. He's been in touch with me regarding this. Unfortunately, there's no much that we can do now that Julian is already in British and American control hands. It's very little what we can do. And it's so sad that there was a country that stepped forward in order to protect Julian and do the right thing. But unfortunately, we were betrayed, and we could, if we get back in power, we could try to become part of the legal team and reactivate the asylum, but it's very little what we in practice can do. Yeah.
Well, on that slightly depressing note, I think we should end the meeting. I just want to say a massive thank you to Matt for his contributions, for his amazing journalism with Declassified, along with Mark Curtis, whose books I highly recommend if you want to sort of sobering accounts of what the reality of UK UK government actions have been in the recent past. Then Mark Curtis is essential reading. So all my respect to Matt and his colleagues at Declassified for the important work they're doing. Fidel, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to your book, but we look forward to your continued activism on behalf of human rights and migrant rights. And thank you so much for giving us this like unique insider account of I mean, I'm sure there's so much more to tell, but we'll all make sure we read your book when it comes out. I don't know that would anyone just like before we end, I'd also like to say that this program will make a big effort to get it out in the next couple of days on the Alborada website. And you can watch this and the other ones we've done. And obviously, if you want to support our work going forward, please do so and get in touch if you have ideas of seminars that we should host. Obviously, one on Ecuador seems to be an important one to do. And stay in touch. Look at our website. Sign up to our e-newsletter. We have another one coming up on the 10th of September that hasn't been announced yet. We'll announce it in our e-newsletter on Thursday, which will be a webinar on the 50 years of the Popular Unity government in Chile, which marks 50 years on the 4th of September when Salvador Allende assumed the presidency there. And again, another process which was offered so much hope for the left regionally and internationally, which was drowned in the blood of US intervention and its local proxies and allies. So we'll be discussing the significance of the Popular Unity government and its legacy. So join us for that. And so thank you, Matt, Fidel. Any final comments we do? Just to say before you hand over to you, that we'll let the some music run for 10 or 15 minutes at the end so people can stay chatting. And thank you all. So I'll give you the final word and then we'll cut to the music, and thank you all for coming and stay in touch with us.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Fidel, anything?
No, just thank you. Thank you, all of you, for your solidarity. The fact that you are watching this conversation is because you are interested in Julian's case and you are supporting this fight. Thank you. I think hope is the last thing that we can lose, and we should stay hopeful. Yeah.
That's a more positive ending.
I also add the same thing, really. I mean, I think Pablo's film, one of the best things about it was that it really showed the amazing collection of people, from journalists to activists to lawyers to bloggers to video filmmakers. There's so many different amazing people in a vibrant community supporting the cause of Assange, who have had the intelligence and the understanding to ignore the huge industry which has been created to try and push them off the scent, to try and make them think that they're supporting a man who's all these awful things. They've seen through it and they understand the importance of this case, and know that it's important for all our freedom, but also for him as a human being, that he is saved from the clutches of a really vicious superpower and its local poodle where we reside ourselves. So yeah, as Fidel said, well done everyone. This is a just cause, and we should all keep fighting until our last breath, until we get him free.
Great, that's a great way to end. I see my mum has joined the conversation and has added, "We will win. Julian Assange will be free." Let's hope so. Yeah. She featured in the film, which you can see. We'll send links afterwards to those that signed up for this to see that, and also Emmy's group, grassroots group, will send links to the group and the actions that they've got planned for September. So thank you, everyone. We're going to leave with some music. Thank you to Matt and Fidel, and see you at the next Alborada Online. Thank you.